Welcome, everyone. You are listening to the new podcast episode of the Votes and Seed podcast of the Center for Political Science of Mathias Corvinus Collegium. My name is Szabolcs Janik, researcher of the center. And in today's episode, we will discuss the recent Turkish presidential and legislative elections and their political consequences. And I have the honor to welcome Mr. Bilgehan Öztürk, researcher of SETA, an Ankara-based think tank. Dear Bilgehan, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for having me.
As a start, could you please summarize the key results of the presidential and legislative elections? And please also highlight one or two aspects that you find interesting or even surprising.
So there are a lot of, let's say, takeaways from the election results. It has been a watershed moment for many reasons in Turkish politics, and even including Turkish foreign policy and its strategic orientation. So starting with the domestic political results, we have seen that starkly divided two camps competing with each other for the presidency, and the incumbent President Erdoğan achieved victory once again. So it has been a record in Turkish political history. It can even be regarded as a record, even compared to other countries in the world too. So for the past 21 consecutive years, President Erdoğan has been in power, and he secured another term of 5 years. So that means he will be in power for the 26 years when he ends his term in 2028. On the other hand, this was the first time that Turkish electorates went to a runoff. So for the past elections in Turkish political history, there was always just one round of presidential or executive for the post of executive elections. Now, for the first time, we had a runoff. And when it comes to the parliamentary election results, it was again the victory of the alliance that President Erdoğan led. So one of the most interesting, or maybe not very interesting, result of the election was that opinion pollsters have been proven wrong, and spectacularly wrong. If you track and if you really follow closely in the run-up to the elections, the opinion pollsters provided by numerous private companies and polling companies, they all showed President Erdoğan's rival Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu ahead of President Erdoğan by a large margin. But in two rounds of presidential elections too, President Erdoğan maintained more than 2.5 million votes ahead of Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. So it was a great failure of opinion pollsters, maybe to the greatest extent compared to previous elections too. And I would say the Erdoğan's victory, despite all the economic odds, I think is one of the most striking part of these elections. So there is a great level of experience, empirical evidence that economic conditions and how the economy goes has a great impact on voter behavior. And maybe for the first time, at least in Turkish political history, I can adamantly claim that this has been a first. When the economy was so bad, the natural result, the natural expectation would be the change of income, but it didn't turn out that way. Despite all the economic odds, despite all the economic problems, so President Erdoğan somehow and his coalition somehow beat the expectations and beat the odds, and once again won the election. So this is, I think, one of the greatest, let's say, trait of this election, and it has very significant, let's say, conclusion for political, let's say, calculations and political studies. Maybe the last takeaway from this election would be we have seen definitely a rise of Turkish nationalism as a huge force determining the outcome of elections. So on the one hand, you had Good Party supporting Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu as part of a nation alliance in the opposition, and you have Nationalist Movement Party on Erdoğan's side, who has been a staunch supporter of President Erdoğan for at least 5 or 6 years as part of People's Alliance, and then you have minor, let's say, nationalist parties. But in the first round, we had 3 let's say, presidential candidates left: President Erdoğan, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, and third place Sinan Oğan, who used to be a part of Nationalist Movement Party, and he became a different alliance, a minor alliance as presidential candidate, and he secured more than 5% of the votes. And in a way, he has been the wild card for the runoff. So both, let's say, alliances courted him for his support for the runoff, and he declared his support to President Erdoğan, and arguably he has been also a sort of support to President Erdoğan's runoff victory in the second round. And we have seen that in provinces and, let's say, in certain towns where President Erdoğan's party, AK Party, lost votes, they were cast for Sinan Oğan. So we have seen on both sides of the aisle a greater support to Turkish nationalist vote, and in the run-up to elections, the wider expectation from the public, or at least this has been the narrative, especially propped up by the opposition channels, that Kurdish votes would be determining the outcome. And despite this strong narrative, actually the other side of the coin has been the determining factor of the election. This has been the Turkish nationalist votes, and I would say it has become much more mainstream than it used to be, and we have seen a consolidation around Turkey's national flag, and the concerns about Turkey's independence, concerns about Turkey's sovereignty in case of a, let's say, change of government, has been influential in the consolidation of People's Alliance voters or President Erdoğan voters in general.
You mentioned the importance of the economic conditions, and I was wondering if there were any favorable positive developments recently that could help Erdoğan's campaign and finally his good results in the field of economy. And more generally speaking, were there any other factors that maybe you didn't mention in your previous answer that helped him?
Of course, the economy was bad. There was a high level of inflation. But at the same time, this was let's say, an opportunity for the incumbents to increase the benefits to people. So when there is a high level of inflation, there's usually a low level of unemployment, and there was the credit boom, as the economists call it. Of course, in the run up to elections, or maybe starting from 1 year ahead of the elections, I would say the government has been generous about providing credits to consumers in terms of credit for buying houses, in terms of credit for buying cars, so on and so forth. So through through usually public banks and with limited, let's say, with a very low level of interest rates. And this has been one of the, let's say, few positive points of the economy. And on the other hand, we have to definitely mention the earthquake impact of the electorate's voting behavior. So when we faced a very disastrous, very destructive earthquake in southeast Turkey, actually for the first couple of days, Turkey couldn't, let's say, organize itself as much as it desired because of the enormity of the earthquake, and the expectation again in the opposition that because of the let's say the enormity of the destruction and the initial poor performance of the government for the first 2 days at least would be a positive point for them, but it turned out to be the opposite. Yes, the first 2 days have been disastrous, but after the 2 days, right after the earthquake, the state mechanisms and state institutions have organized themselves very well. And when the acute phase of the crisis was left behind, it was all the state institutions, all state efforts that have been supporting the earthquake victims. So it wasn't the NGOs anymore. It wasn't the let's say private initiatives anymore. The state institutions and state actors have been much more resilient and have been much more durable in their service in the earthquake zone. So this has been, and I think they have seen the sincerity and resourcefulness again of the government in response to the earthquake. And one of the let's say greatest strengths of President Erdoğan is his direct communication with masses. And when he makes mistakes, he sincerely admits it, and he asks for forgiveness. And when he visited and toured the earthquake zone, he in a particular province facing the, let's say, the level of destruction, he actually asked for forgiveness from the people. And as a result, we have seen a very high level of votes cast for him from that province. And in general, in say all the earthquake hits provinces. And in between the two rounds, another factor that played in favor of President Erdoğan was when the first round ended. There was a very outpour of hate speech towards earthquake victims from the opposition supporters on social media, and I think this really triggered a huge reaction from earthquake victims, and they mobilized and with great motivation in the runoff to cast even higher, let's say, vote for President Erdoğan in the second round. And I think as much as the positive points that President Erdoğan and his alliance scored during campaign, I think the very poor performance and many wrong steps and mistakes made by the opposition have been also quite influential in the election results. So there are a few, let's say, positive points. The fewer of them obviously belongs to the economy, but we have to definitely also mention the defense industry products. So the campaign of President Erdoğan was focused on the nation's achievements under President Erdoğan's leadership. So we have seen every other day, maybe every day, another inauguration of a great project, another launch of a Turkish product, such as the electrical vehicle car, such as new defense industry products, another Turkish drone, another Turkish indigenously produced fighter jets, for example, or at least developments, tangible developments in these projects. And I think this defense industry and also technological achievements under President Erdoğan have been quite influential in favor of him in the minds of electorate. Obviously, the economy was the least disadvantaged area, but even in economy, as I said, through certain instruments, there have been some mitigating, let's say, tools for the economic problems that people faced.
You already referred to voting behavior. And if we turn to electoral geography, which regions and social groups voted for Erdoğan and AKP in general, and which for the opposition? And was there any change in these patterns compared to previous elections?
Actually, the patterns did not change very much. So if we look at for the past 20 years, we see that there's a geographical distribution of respective supports to mainly AKP, President Erdoğan, or CHP, the main opposition party. So if you look at the, let's say, coastal areas, the Aegean coast, the Mediterranean coast, and there is, for the past, let's say, the most recent elections, with the addition of Istanbul and Ankara. So the biggest city, Istanbul, and the capital have been won by the opposition in previous municipal elections, local elections. But this time, I think this victory of, let's say, the local victory, Istanbul and Ankara, I think have been cemented by this election. So in both parliamentary and presidential elections, Istanbul, the greatest city and capital city, have also voted more for the opposition. So this is another novelty as a result of these elections. But apart from that, the Thrace, Turkey's European, let's say, territories, western and southern coastal lines have always been voting for CHP, Republican People's Party, the main opposition party. And this has been proven again the case in this election too. When it comes to the southeastern Kurdish majority cities and provinces, again, we have seen the highest support to pro-PKK HDP party. This did not change. This changed in a very, let's say, very minimal way because of the division of this votes by a Turkish, let's say, communist party. So this, I think, divided a portion of the pro-PKK votes to HDP. And that is the reason why there was a slight decrease in their votes. When it comes to the highest level of support to President Erdoğan and his, let's say, alliance, the People's Alliance, I think it has been also traditionally the same. The Central Anatolian region and also the Black Sea region. The Black Sea region have traditionally been the region where the highest level of support over the years have been lent to President Erdoğan, and this again have been the case. The only difference, probably the great cities, Istanbul and Ankara, and the obvious explanation for that is Istanbul is the most crowded city. Istanbul is the where Turkey's greatest economic activity is concentrated, and as a result, the middle, let's say, middle class the greatest numbers of the members of middle class live in Istanbul. So because of the economic problems in Turkey for the past 2 or 3 years, the middle class have been the greatest victim. And it is definitely a reaction of the middle class to President Erdoğan and the ruling party, and actually they reacted for the economic woes they felt for the past 2 or 3 years, and I think apart from the Istanbul and Ankara, the patterns of voting of all the electorates have been quite, let's say, consistent, and it seems like every voter segment in society stood for their traditional, let's say, identity or their traditional, let's say, party and leader. There is only one, let's say, surprise probably, and depending on how you look at it, it's not a surprise. So one of the most, maybe the worst, let's say, hits by earthquake provinces has been Hatay in southern Turkey. And in the first round of elections, Hatay voted predominantly for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu and his Nation Alliance. But in the runoff, Hatay has been the only province that changed its decision. In the runoff, they voted for President Erdoğan, and because of the let's say the earthquake and also the response from the government to earthquake, there was a very huge success story in Hatay. In 45 days, in a town in Hatay, the state built and let's say put a hospital in operation in 45 days. So I think this level of success, of this level of let's say hard-working behavior from the government, have been rewarded by the electorate in this town, and this has been the, let's say, in addition to the big cities, Istanbul and Ankara's changing hands, this has been the only surprise, and it has been between 2 rounds. In that reason, it has been a fun surprise.
We talk less about the legislative election, which is understandable for several reasons, but you also refer to it. Beyond AKP and CHP, what were the other key parties in the 2 blocs? And which of them were relatively successful and which can be deemed relative losers of the election? But before you answer, could you please briefly explain the powers and competencies of the Grand National Assembly in relation to the president?
Of course, the expectation when we switch to presidential election is that there will be a decrease in the power of the Grand National Assembly. It is not the case because it is still the highest representation of Turkish people's will, and obviously, as a legislative body, they have the power of the legislation. So presidential decrees cannot, let's say, replace bills and cannot replace legislation by the parliament. So in that sense, the parliament is quite important. And when it comes to, let's say, voting for the budgets or approving budgets, and especially the mandates to, let's say, deploy Turkish troops or mandating Turkish army for overseas, let's say, missions have been quite significant, especially for the past decade in Turkey, because of the reasons, because of the threats Turkey has been facing in northern Syria, and because of the Syrian civil war. It has been really, let's say, crucial for Turkey to deploy a certain amount of Turkish troops in extraterritorial regions, either for stemming the flow of irregular refugees or stemming or countering the threats posed by YPG in northern Syria, and also its operations in northern Iraq against PKK. And in addition to that, we also know about Turkish mission in Libya and Turkish mission in Azerbaijan too. So the extraterritorial Turkish army's presence has been a really significant issue, and this mandate can only be given and approved by the Grand National Assembly. So in this sense, among all the, let's say, significance of parliaments for states' power and also Turkish political, let's say, legitimacy, now we have another importance of parliaments when it comes to Turkish army's mission overseas. So this is important again for the different orientations of political parties in Turkey. For example, the opposition bloc have been vocally against renewing Turkish troops' mandate overseas. And for example, the leading opposition party, Republican People's Party, they did not, let's say, stamp on Turkey's latest, for example, military operation in northern Syria. So the concern was that if Nation Alliance or the opposition alliance achieved the majority in the parliament, this might be the end of Turkish troops' mandate overseas, because they were in tight, let's say, cooperation with pro-PKK HDP party too. So we know that HDP has been very strongly against all these let's say, military operations and Turkish troops, let's say, overseas presence, and this has been with the awareness that Turkish troops' presence overseas, like in northern Iraq and northern Syria, putting huge pressure on PKK, from which they draw their support. So the main concern was that if there was a change of, let's say, arithmetic in the parliament, and if opposition secures the majority because of their close relations with HDP, this might have consequences for Turkish interests and for Turkish national security in more general terms. So when it comes to the, let's say, the distribution in the parliament, now we are seeing a very, let's say, high level of representation with a huge level of participation from very different political parties. So in the past, we had probably five or six political parties, but you know, when we say five political party, obviously the major ones are just four. The other one or the other two of them are, you know, marginal parties with very limited number of seats. But this time, because like certain minor parties entered into elections through bigger parties' lists, now they secured greater numbers of seats in the parliament. For example, in the Nation Alliance, we have some splinter parties that split from AKP party, the Deva party led by ex-economic minister Ali Babacan, the Future Party led by the previous former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu, and we have the Felicity Party, again an Islamist party. These three parties entered into elections through Republican People's Party's party lists. So actually, they are among the greater winners of this election, because despite having less than 1% of votes from electorates, they actually secured around 10% representation in the parliament because of their deal with Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu granted them a high level of seats in the parliament by representing them, by nominating them at the very, let's say, highest level of their lists. And because of this political parties, smaller, minor political parties, disproportionately achieved a high representation. So when it comes to losers, definitely Republican People's Party is a loser here. Just because of this scheme that they created with smaller parties, they lost a considerable amount of their seats in the parliament. The Good Party, actually the second biggest and major party, it is a nationalist party supporting Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, another loser, I would say, because there was a trend that Turkish nationalists started to, let's say, switch their vote traditionally from MHP, the Nationalist Movement Party, to Good Party, led by Meral Akşener. So this was, in a way, actually a shift of, let's say, alliance on the part of Turkish nationalists too. So MHP is supporting President Erdoğan, and Good Party is supporting Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. But in this election, we have seen a decrease of votes for the Good Party, and they are another, let's say, loser of this compared to their previous performances. And MHP, on the other hand, Nationalist Movement Party, increased its votes to more than 10%. So they actually recuperated whatever they lost in previous elections to Good Party. They actually gained them back. So in terms of this performance, MHP has been another winner of this, and I would say we have new actors that did not exist before, such as the Yeniden Refah Party, Yeniden Refah political party, who has been quite conservative, traditionally Islamist political party in Turkey. He is the son of the famous Necmettin Erbakan, the founding father of Islamist politics in Turkey. Now he is in a position of having 5 seats in the parliament with around 3% of the votes. So basically, and we have to also add as losers of this election the HDP. The HDP entered the elections with a new brand name, the Green Left political party, because of the lawsuit against the HDP. And as I said in the previous explanation, because of, let's say, division of votes with Turkish let's say, Communist party, they also lost seats again compared to previous elections. So basically, these are the main losers and winners of the parliamentary election.
Thank you very much. And my final question would be the following. In a new term, what will be the key challenges for Erdoğan in domestic politics, in the economy, and in foreign policy? And can he somehow mitigate or moderate the heavy division of the Turkish society? What is your opinion?
Let's start with the economy. Of course, domestically speaking, I would say the election results demonstrate that his overall performance have been, despite all the negatives, his overall performance have been approved by people. And this has been despite the very bad economic situation. So that means he doesn't have to do much about domestic politics. But the only area that he has to concentrate on is the economy. So we have some chronic problems in Turkish economy, such as the current account deficit. There is an imbalance between Turkey's imports and exports. And the greatest, let's say, source of this account deficit is Turkey's energy bill. Turkey has to decrease its level of dependence on external especially hydrocarbon resources, oil and gas, in a way. And Turkey already started to, let's say, tap its own, let's say, resources, whether they are already explored or not. There is a huge, let's say, endeavor to explore more of Turkish own national resources like oil and gas. The one Turkey explored, discovered in Black Sea region, a huge natural gas resources, and also some in southeastern Turkey, some new exploration of oils are obviously helping, but Turkey needs more. And this has to be coupled with a globally moderate levels of energy prices, by the way. No matter how, let's say, Turkey decreases its dependence on external energy resources, as long as the energy prices are high globally, this will again contribute to the mounting energy bill of Turkey. And as I said, this has been the main reason of the account deficit in Turkey. And the foreign currency, let's say, revenues of Turkey. Turkey is in need of foreign currency reserves, and for this, it has to, let's say, increase the level, and at the same time increase the sophistication of its exports. Yes, Turkey has a very, let's say, competitive export capacity. It is mainly the export partner of the European Union. European Union is the, let's say, leading export partner of Turkey, but still Turkey needs to upgrade its economic competitiveness when it comes to exporting high-tech, value-added, let's say, products globally. There is a trend in this direction, and Turkish indigenous defense industry products have also been quite helpful in this direction. There is a greater, let's say, attention. There's a greater level of interest around the world for Turkish indigenous defense industry products. This is quite promising, and this is the way forward for Turkey as, let's say, overcoming its chronic economic problems, and also the civilian technological products too, such as the electrical vehicle. Turkish produced electrical vehicle TOG has also a huge potential, and this potential has to be realized via actions. So this is for domestic politics. When it comes to let's say, foreign policy, obviously the relations with the United States have been the, let's say, the most the most difficult of its relations, and it has been quite destabilizing for Turkey's foreign policy, at least for the past decade. It has to be somehow managed, and there are, let's say, difficult files ahead of us, such as the procurement of new batch of F-16 fighter jets from the United States. Turkey wants to modernize its fleets, F-16, with a new batch of F-16 from the United States, but the Congress is quite, let's say, unfavorable for this procurement, and they base their opposition on quite ideological grounds, and they are not really flexible. And their anti-Turkey or anti-Erdoğan sentiments and positions are quite well known. And these sentiments will not go away. On the other hand, we have Joe Biden in the White House, and we know that the administration is in favor of, let's say, selling F-16 fighter jets to Turkey. And it has the power to put pressure on the Congress. But their problem is they tie the procurement process to Turkey's acceptance or approval of Swedish accession into NATO. Turkey, again, can let's say, approve of Sweden's accession into NATO. There's no problem, and Turkey doesn't have any categorical, let's say, opposition to NATO's expansion, as it's showcased in its track record, as it's showcased in its approval of Finland's, for example. But there is still some work to do in Sweden in terms of cracking down on terror-related activities of PKK on Swedish soil. So on the very day when Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, visited Turkey to discuss Swedish accession into NATO, PKK supporters, PKK members, put up a very high level of protests and propaganda in the middle of Stockholm. So this means, of course, there are certain steps that have been taken by Swedish authorities, and they are welcome. But it is apparently not enough to, let's say, limit and curb terror-related activities in Sweden. So Turkey's only concern has been this terror support emanating from Sweden's soil. So if Sweden can curb these capacities of PKK, there's no reason why Turkey would drag Swedish accession. But Turkey has, let's say, displeasure with US position is that Washington is tying two separate files together, and this is not what Turkey wants. As whether there was a Swedish accession agenda or not into NATO, because of Turkey's long-standing strategic alliance with the United States, Turkey must be entitled to procure F-16 fighter jets from the United States. And by the way, F-16 fighter jets are not the most sophisticated, let's say, fighter jets, existing now. They are, of course, capable fighter jets, but they are, a relatively older generation of fighter jets. So the reason why Turkey wants to procure new batch of F-16 fighter jets is the, let's say, institutional familiarity with F-16 fighter jets. Turkish Air Force, air fleet is completely consisted of F-16 fighter jets for years. The pilots, the training, in all these familiarity, Turkey wants to have that plane particularly, but at the same time, it is a way of Turkey to show its willingness for the continuation of interdependence and partnership with the United States. So Turkey wants Washington to realize that this is an effort by Turkey to show goodwill, but for now, at least until now, we have not seen this realization in the Washington. They stick to their position of tying two files together. Like, if Turkey wants to get F-16, they need to approve Swedish accession into NATO. Whether they did their duty in terms of PKK or not, this is what the United States wants, and they want it in the upcoming July summit of NATO. So this is quite going to be a challenge in Turkey's foreign policy, and of course there are other challenges around Turkey. Turkey is unfortunately surrounded by a number of, let's say, destabilizing factors such as civil wars and the war in Ukraine. All of these will be challenging, let's say, files in Turkish foreign policy, but the NATO accession and the regulation of the relationship with the United States will be probably the most challenging ones.
Thank you very much, Birhan, and thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts about the recent Turkish elections.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
Dear listener, thank you for following our podcast, and please stay tuned for the upcoming Votes and Seeds episodes as well. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.